Debate, the Honourable Member for Beaches, East York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be splitting my time with the member from Don Valley West. I want to begin with words from former Senator and Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire. The warning signs preceding genocide in this case are ever present. The Rohingya have often been referred to as illegal Bengalis, with some of Burma's Buddhists demanding that they go back to where they belong, be it Bangladesh or elsewhere. Generally, they are forbidden from owning land, from intermarrying with Buddhists, and from having more than 2 children. The international community must take early preventative action now in order to reverse Burma's current trend towards catastrophe and possibly genocide. Mr. Dallaire wrote these words on March 24, 2014. He rightly called for the restoration of full citizenship. He called for the immediate authorization and deployment of international police units to Rakhine and an education campaign to counter the racist propaganda. I recently met with Ahmed Ullah alongside a number of my colleagues. Mr. Ullah is a Rohingya refugee who was born in a refugee camp and came to Canada in 2009. In a recent interview, he noted that his mother receives calls from family members stating that we might not see the next daylight or we may not survive the next hour. John Packer, a professor of law and human rights at the University of Ottawa, recently pointed to the unadulterated racism towards the Rohingya and wrote that now is the time to stand up on the side of human rights and fully inclusive democracies. As others have noted, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has called the Exodus a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. As Mr. Dallaire noted in his warning of years ago, the state of Myanmar has persecuted the Rohingya for decades. They have denied their citizenship, history, and identity, placed restrictions on families, education, and mobility, engaged in arbitrary arrests and extrajudicial killings, all with the cumulative intent of denying their participation in society, driving them out, and destroying them. This decades-long campaign of cultural genocide has recently turned to actual genocide. Myanmar's military has raped and murdered Rohingya, burned villages of predominantly Rohingya ethnic minorities to the ground, and triggered a mass exodus. Hundreds of thousands of Rohingya have fled to Bangladesh, over 400,000 refugees into Bangladesh over the last few weeks alone. 200 ethnic Rohingya villages now stand empty. As the chair of the Canada-Bangladesh Parliamentary Friendship Group, I want to extend my deep gratitude to Bangladesh for the assistance they have provided, especially in the face of the floods that they've been experiencing, where 2/3 of the country have been underwater. Bangladesh has exhibited compassion, and when we look at Canada's own efforts with our refugee efforts over last year and this year, where we took in over 45,000 refugees last year, we're committed to 40,000 refugees this year, that effort pales in comparison to the efforts underway in accommodating Rohingya refugees on the Bangladeshi border. Now, Canada has contributed over $9 million to this cause, to humanitarian aid, but we need to do more. Before coming tonight, I was cutting mushrooms, Mr. Speaker. I was in my kitchen in my apartment with my wife and my 13-month-old, and my 13th-month-old walked up behind me and bit my leg. And it hurt, and I was not particularly happy at the time, but I have to say, in the context of this debate, in the context of all of the horrible news, it's also, I have to say, a reminder of how lucky I am to live in Canada. Abdul Hamid, 12 years old, this is one of thousands and thousands of stories, Mr. Speaker. He saw his father shot in front of him. When his father didn't die, the soldier slit his father's throat in front of him. He and his mother and 4 younger siblings then hid in the forest for days and then walked for 2 days to reach the safety of Bangladesh. I don't have the answers, Mr. Speaker. Sanction, aid, multilateral force, I don't know. But I cannot stress the importance of intervention enough in the name of human rights. The international community has a responsibility to protect ethnic minorities in the face of genocide and to assist the nation of Bangladesh in their efforts to help them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, and I thank my honourable friend from East York, the Toronto Beaches. I'm afraid I've better check my proper name for his riding.
Beaches East York.
Beaches East York. The situation we're debating tonight is unbelievably heart-wrenching, and I'm searching for things that we can tangibly, concretely recommend that the Government of Canada do, admitting and acknowledging that there's already much that is being done. One area that I want to focus on and ask the honourable member if he agrees is that the Army of Myanmar has been using landmines in contravention to the Ottawa Treaty. Bangladesh is a party to the Ottawa Treaty and has, some years ago, had an agreement with Myanmar to allow the removal of all landmines in the borderlands between Bangladesh and Myanmar. In the last few weeks and months, Myanmar military have been adding more landmines with the deliberate purpose of killing people as they flee. Given Ottawa's leadership in developing the Landmines Treaty, given that there's an existing agreement between the states of Myanmar and Bangladesh to remove landmines, wouldn't it be a very useful thing for Canada to do to provide the funds and the technical assistance for Bangladesh to remove the landmines in those borderlands?
The honourable member for Beaches, East York.
I thank the member for the question, and I had not turned my mind particularly to that solution, but it seems like it may well be an effective one. I would note that in my discussions with and listening to the advice of human rights advocates, their principal concern is that human rights observers be allowed on the ground and be permitted to document and investigate the atrocities. That in and of itself will put pressure on the military and authorities to stop what they are doing. Again, I don't know how effective that is, but that's the advice received, and certainly whether it's funding for humanitarian aid, whether it's pushing at the international level for the Security Council to take decisive action, and certainly where we have expertise and a history of engaging on landmines, that makes perfect sense.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank my colleague for his speech. I know we don't always agree, but I know he's very thoughtful. So I want to ask him his thoughts on the broader question of how we respond to cases of ethnic cleansing and genocide. Because it seems to me, if you look over the last 100 years, this repeat pattern of these events happen, we don't really pay enough attention to them while they're happening, and then we wring our hands after the fact and we think, why didn't we do more? And then the same events happen again. So how can we as an international community get into a pattern of actually always consistently responding in the moment, really anticipating these problems, responding in the moment, and actually addressing them so that we don't go through this repeated after-the-fact hand-wringing? How can we change the way we behave as an international community? I'd appreciate his thoughts on that.
The honourable member for Beaches, East York.
I thank the member for his question and for being a vocal advocate on this file in particular. It's depressing in some ways to hear never again, again, and again, and again, and which is why I started my comments with words from Mr. Dallaire over 3 years ago. I would also note that if we go back to, the early spring, in February of 2017 of this year, there were reports of thousands of killings, and the international community did not act in the face of that news. As to the answer of how you get the international community to take notice, to act, I think when you look at the Security Council and the makeup of the Security Council and its inability to take decisive action, I think that's a real problem. I mean, when you look at Romeo Dallaire's words from Rwanda, he says, if I'd had only 5,000 troops, I could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. And maybe it takes a small standing army of some sort, a multilateral force, to at least be deployed quickly and easily in situations such as this on the ground. Because certainly I don't think, just as in Rwanda, I don't think we would have seen the atrocities had a small deployment of police forces Romeo Dallaire was calling for in 2014 being authorized and deployed at that time. I don't think we would see the atrocities we see today.